The aroma of fresh coffee and pancakes filled the morning air at the Bluestone Diner. Mai wiped the sweat from her forehead with her sleeve as she hurried between tables, her worn-out sneakers squeaking against the checkered floor. The familiar weight of plates balanced on her arms had become second nature after 10 years of serving endless breakfast specials and bottomless coffee refills. "Order up," called out Uncle Joe from the kitchen window, his voice mixing with the clinking of cutlery and morning chatter. May grabbed 2 plates of steaming omelets, managing a genuine smile despite her exhaustion. The morning rush at the diner was always intense, but today felt particularly challenging. She delivered the omelets to table 7, where a kind elderly couple always sat on Tuesday mornings. They had been coming to the diner since before Mai started working there, and they treated her like family. "Thank you, dear," the old lady said, her eyes crinkling with warmth. These small moments of connection made the long hours more bearable. During quieter moments, Mai found herself lost in thought, her fingers unconsciously tapping rhythms on the counter as she refilled sugar dispensers. Music had always been her escape, her private joy. Her grandmother's guitar waited patiently at home, carefully preserved in its case beside her bed. Some nights, when the weight of unfulfilled dreams felt too heavy, she would take it out and quietly strum, remembering how her grandmother's hands once brought those same strings to life. The diner's old radio played softly in the background, mixing with the sounds of sizzling bacon and conversation. May caught herself humming along to a familiar tune, her voice barely above a whisper. A few regular customers noticed, sharing knowing smiles. They had heard her before, these subtle moments when her true passion leaped through the cracks of her everyday routine. The lunch rush approached, and Mi's feet already ached. She ducked into the break room, pulling out a wrinkled notebook from her bag. Between its pages, hidden from the world, were lyrics she had scribbled during countless bus rides home. Dreams written in blue ink, stories of hope and perseverance that she wasn't quite ready to share. Her coworker Raj, who had been cooking at the diner for 20 years, caught her writing during her break. "Still working on those songs?" he asked gently, sliding her a fresh cup of coffee. Unlike others who dismissed creative pursuits as impractical fantasies, Raj understood. In his younger days, he had played drums in local bands, and sometimes he would tell stories about those glory days while preparing the morning prep. The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, creating patterns on the worn tabletops. Mai watched the dust particles dance in the light beams as she cleared tables, each movement part of a routine she could probably perform in her sleep. Yet, beneath the surface of this daily dance, a different rhythm pulled at her heart. A group of street musicians set up outside the diner, their music drifting in every time the door opened. Mai found herself moving differently, her steps falling in time with their melody. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life. One where she stood under spotlight instead of fluorescent diner lights, where her voice carried stories to eager ears instead of food orders to hungry customers. As the day wound down, Mai counted her tips, tucking them carefully into her wallet. Each dollar represented another small step towards something bigger, though she wasn't quite sure what that something was yet. The dream of music pulled at her, but the reality of bills and responsibilities held her firmly in place. Still, as she hung up her apron and grabbed her bag, she felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the one that reminded her there was more to her story than serving plates and pouring coffee. Walking home in the purple dusk, she passed by the local music shop, its window display featuring a beautiful acoustic guitar. Mai paused, her reflection mingling with the instrument's polished surface. In that moment, standing between the life she had and the one she dreamed of, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting for permission to chase her dreams. The Wednesday afternoon lull had settled over the Bluestone Diner like a comfortable blanket. Mai found herself in the quiet storage room, organizing supplies while soft melodies escaped her lips. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she stacked paper towels and counted napkin bundles, her voice growing slightly braver in the solitude. She didn't notice Raj standing in the doorway until he cleared his throat. Mi jumped, nearly dropping the container of straws she was holding. "Don't stop," he said, leaning against the metal shelf. "That song you were singing, it's yours, isn't it?" Heat crept up her neck as she nodded. Nobody was supposed to hear these private moments when she let her guard down. But Raj's eyes held no judgment, only a spark of recognition. He walked over to help her with the heavy box of cleaning supplies, his movements deliberate as he chose his next words. "You know, I've been hearing you sing for months now," he said, adjusting his white cook's apron. "Between orders during cleanup. Always when you think no one's listening." He chuckled softly. "The regulars have noticed too. Mrs. Chen from Table 4 asked me last week if you'd ever performed anywhere." Mai busied herself with reorganizing the coffee filters, trying to hide her embarrassment. "It's just something I do to pass the time," she mumbled, but even she didn't believe her own words. The songs that lived in her head were more than simple time fillers. They were pieces of her heart, stories waiting to be told. Later that afternoon, while refilling salt shakers, Mai found herself thinking about her grandmother. The memory of watching those weathered hands move across guitar strings was still vivid, along with the way her grandmother's eyes would close in pure joy as she played. "Music isn't just in your voice or your fingers," she used to say. "It's in your soul, waiting to fly free." The dinner rush brought its usual chaos, but something felt different. Mai noticed the way Mr. Thompson, a gruff businessman who came in every evening, tapped his foot when she hummed while pouring his coffee. The teenage couple in the corner booth stopped their conversation to listen when she absent-mindedly sang along with the radio while wiping down nearby tables. "You've got something special there," Raj said as they closed up that night. He was cleaning the grill, the rhythmic scraping of his spatula creating its own kind of music. "Reminds me of when I first started playing drums. Couldn't afford lessons, but man, I had this fire inside that wouldn't let me quit." May paused in her sweeping, leaning on the broom handle. "But how did you know you were good enough?" The question that had haunted her spilled out before she could stop it. Raj laughed, the sound echoing in the empty diner. "Good enough for what?" "For making music. You're already doing that, aren't you?" He pointed to her heart. "The only permission you need is right in there." As they finished closing, Raj mentioned that his old band used to practice in a small studio downtown. "Still know the owner," he said casually. "He lets people book the space for cheap during off hours. Just in case you ever want to try something beyond the storage room." That night, after her shift, Mai took a different route home. Her feet carried her past the music shop again, but this time she didn't just look at the guitar in the window. She went inside. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the smell of wood and polish wrapped around her like a warm embrace. An elderly man looked up from behind the counter. His hands paused in the act of restringing a violin. "Can I help you?" he asked kindly. Mi's fingers traced the smooth curve of a guitar body, feeling the potential humming beneath the polished surface. "I'm not sure," she answered honestly. "But I think I'm ready to find out." The man smiled, recognition flickering in his eyes. He had seen that same look countless times before, in others who stood on the brink of letting their music take flight. "Sometimes," he said, picking up a guitar and offering it to her, "the first step is just letting yourself try." Friday nights at the Bluestone Diner were always special. For the past 5 years, local musicians would perform while customers enjoyed their meals, creating an atmosphere that transformed the humble diner into something magical. Tonight was supposed to be Old Pete and his harmonica, a crowd favorite, but at 6 o'clock, the phone rang. "He's got the flu," the owner announced, running his hands through his gray hair. "Can't make it." The disappointment was visible on the faces of the regular customers who had come specifically for the music. Mrs. Chen, sipping her tea at her usual corner table, sighed quietly. Raj caught Mia's eye from the kitchen window. She quickly looked away, but not before seeing the meaningful look on his face. Her heart started racing as she realized what he was thinking. No, she mouthed silently, shaking her head. But Raj was already walking out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. Hey, boss, he called out. I might have a solution. Before Mai could stop him, he was telling the owner about her singing, about the songs she wrote, about her grandmother's guitar that sat in her apartment just 3 blocks away. The owner looked at May with surprise and curiosity. You sing? He asked. Regular customers who had overheard began to chime in, mentioning how they'd heard her humming, how her voice always lifted their spirits. Mrs. Chen stood up and walked to the counter. Let her try, she said softly. We've all heard her when she thinks we're not listening. Mi's hands trembled as she filled a coffee cup. I don't have any experience performing, she protested. But Raj was already untying his apron. I'll cover your tables, he said. Go get your guitar. You've got nothing to lose except regret. The walk home felt like floating in a dream. Her apartment had never seemed so far away, yet suddenly she was standing in front of her door, hands shaking as she turned the key. Her grandmother's guitar case sat in the corner, covered in a thin layer of dust. As she opened it, the familiar smell of wood and memories washed over her. Walking back to the diner, guitar case in hand, Mai felt like everyone on the street could hear her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see Raj rearranging tables to create a small performance space. Mrs. Chen was helping him, moving chairs with the energy of someone half her age. The owner had put up a hastily made sign. Tonight, special performance by our own Mi. Seeing her name written there made everything feel terrifyingly real. In the bathroom, she splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. You can do this, she whispered to herself, remembering her grandmother's words about music being in her soul. Setting up took only a few minutes, but they felt like hours. Her coworkers had cleared a small space near the window, where the evening light streamed in golden and warm. Someone had brought a tall stool from the storage room. The regular customers watched with encouraging smiles as she carefully tuned the guitar, its strings slightly stiff from disuse. Taking a deep breath, Mai looked around the diner. These weren't strangers. They were the people who had been part of her daily life for years. Mr. Thompson had put down his newspaper. The teenage couple had stopped scrolling on their phones. Mrs. Chen beamed from her corner table, hands clasped in anticipation. This is a song I wrote about dreams that wait too long, Mai said softly into the expectant silence. Her fingers found the first chord, muscle memory from countless private practice sessions taking over. As she began to play, the familiar dinner sounds of clinking plates and buzzing conversations faded away. The first notes of her guitar filled the space, tentative at first, then growing stronger. When she started singing, her voice trembled slightly, but the warmth in the room gave her courage. It was a simple song about ordinary moments and extraordinary hopes, about coffee cups and dawn light and the music that lives in unexpected places. As she sang, something shifted in the air. The diner regulars leaned forward in their seats, caught up in the melody. A couple walking past the diner stopped to listen through the window. Even the kitchen staff paused their work, drawn by the raw honesty in her voice. In that moment, under the glow of the diner's lights, Mai felt herself transforming. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was becoming who she had always been meant to be. And as the last notes faded away, in the brief silence before the applause began, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. For the first time in years, she saw herself clearly, and she was smiling. The applause that filled the diner felt like a warm embrace. As Mai stood up from the stool, her legs slightly shaky, customers began approaching her one by one. Mrs. Chen had tears in her eyes as she squeezed Mi's hand. Your grandmother would have been so proud, she whispered, and Mai felt her own eyes growing misty. But among the familiar faces, there was one she didn't recognize. A woman sat quietly at the counter, her coffee untouched, watching the scene unfold with keen interest. She had come in during the middle of May's second song, ordered a slice of pie that remained uneaten, and taken notes on her phone. As the crowd dispersed and Mai began helping Raj clear tables, the woman approached. "I wasn't planning to stay," she said, sliding her business card across the counter. "I just stopped in for a quick dinner on my way to another appointment. But then I heard your voice." She smiled warmly. "I'm Lynn. I work with Rainbow Records downtown." Mi's hands froze in the act of stacking plates. Rainbow Records was a small but respected local music label known for discovering indie artists. Her heart began racing as Lynn continued speaking. "Your songs have something special, a rawness and honesty that can't be manufactured." Lynn paused, choosing her words carefully. "We're always looking for authentic voices. Would you be interested in recording a few demos at our studio?" The plates in Mi's hands suddenly felt very heavy. She set them down carefully, aware of Raj watching from the kitchen, pretending not to listen. I don't know," she stammered. "I've never recorded anything before. I just work here. I'm not really a musician." Lynn interrupted gently. "From what I heard tonight, that's exactly what you are. Whether you work in a diner or not doesn't change that." She pulled out her phone. "I recorded a bit of your last song. Hope you don't mind. Listen." Through the phone speaker, Maya heard her own voice, clear and strong, singing about chasing dreams in the early morning light. It sounded different from the voice she heard in her head. Better, somehow. More real. The evening rush was ending, and the diner had grown quiet. Mr. Thompson, finishing his usual evening coffee, called out from his table. "Take the chance, kid. We'll still be here if it doesn't work out." Several other regulars nodded in agreement. The owner emerged from his office, where he'd been doing paperwork. "You know," he said, leaning on the counter, "we could adjust your schedule. Maybe work something out so you could have some regular time off for recording." His eyes crinkled with kindness. Good music needs room to grow. Mai looked around the diner, at the worn vinyl seats that had supported countless dreams before hers, at the window where her reflection now showed someone different from the person she'd seen that morning. Her grandmother's guitar, safely back in its case, seemed to hum with possibility. "The thing is," Lynn added, seeing Mi's hesitation, "music isn't about being perfect. It's about being true. And what you did tonight, that was truth." She stood up, gathering her things. "Think about it. Call me next week if you're interested. No pressure." As Lynn walked toward the door, May found her voice. "Wait," she called out. "The songs, they're just about ordinary things. Daily life, coffee cups, morning light. Nothing fancy." Lynn turned back, her hand on the door handle. "Honey, that's exactly what makes them extraordinary. Sometimes the most powerful songs are the ones that help people see the magic in their everyday lives." She smiled one last time, "Just like you did tonight." After Lynn left, Mai sat at the counter, her work apron still tied around her waist, her fingers tracing the edges of the business card. Raj placed a cup of chamomile tea in front of her. He always seemed to know exactly what people needed. "You know what the hardest part of playing drums was?" he asked, polishing a coffee mug. "Not the rhythms or the techniques. It was believing I had the right to make music at all." He set the mug down and looked at her seriously. "Don't waste 10 years wondering if you're good enough. You already are." The diner's old clock ticked steadily on the wall, marking the moment when everything could change. Outside, the city moved in its usual rhythm, but inside, a new song was beginning to take shape. One made of courage, possibility, and the kind of faith that turns ordinary evenings into turning points. A week had passed since Lynn's visit to the diner, and her business card sat on Mi's small kitchen table, worn at the edges from being picked up and put down countless times. The morning sun filtered through her apartment window, casting long shadows across her bills spread out on the table. Rent, electricity, student loans, and the medical expenses from her grandmother's final year. Mai sipped her coffee, the same blend she served at the diner, as she ran the numbers again. The owner had been true to his word about flexible scheduling, offering to cut her hours to part-time. But even with careful budgeting, the math was stubborn. Part-time wages would barely cover her basic expenses, leaving nothing for emergencies. Her phone buzzed. A text from Raj. Don't overthink it. Some chances only come once. Easy for him to say, she thought, but then remembered his stories about choosing between a stable job at his family's store and pursuing his passion for music. He'd found a way to do both, at least for a while. The morning light caught the dust motes dancing around her grandmother's guitar, propped in the corner. She remembered the day her grandmother had given it to her, just months before getting sick. Life is too short to leave songs unsung, she had said, pressing the instrument into May's teenage hands. Now, at 28, those words carried new weight. Her shift at the diner started in an hour, but Mai found herself picking up the guitar instead of her work uniform. Her fingers moved automatically to the chord progression of her newest song, one she'd written after Lynn's visit, about standing at crossroads and the courage it takes to change direction. The sound of children playing outside floated through her window, mixing with the guitar notes. A memory surfaced. Her grandmother teaching neighborhood kids simple songs on Sunday afternoons, saying music was meant to be shared, not hoarded. The joy in those children's faces when they managed to play their first chord, that was pure magic. At the diner that afternoon, every interaction felt different. Mrs. Chen asked about her decision while ordering her usual tea. My mother wanted me to be a doctor, she shared, stirring honey into her cup. I became a teacher instead. Less money, yes, but 40 years of happy mornings make up for that. The teenage couple who always sat in the corner booth had filmed her performance on their phones. You're trending on local social media, they told her excitedly. People are asking where they can hear more of your music. The girl showed Mai her phone. The video had thousands of views, with comments asking for more songs. During her break, Mai retreated to the storage room, her old practice space. The boxes of supplies seemed to hold memories of all the songs she'd sung here, thinking no one could hear. A stack of napkins reminded her of the lyrics she'd scribbled on them during slow afternoons. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights had become part of her musical journey. The dinner rush brought its usual chaos, but tonight it felt like a metaphor for her decision. Every plate balanced, every order remembered, every smile maintained. All of it was a dance she had mastered. But was mastering something the same as loving it? Was security worth the price of an unlived dream? As she refilled Mr. Thompson's coffee cup, he spoke without looking up from his newspaper. You know, I spent 30 years doing what was safe. Retired now, and my biggest regrets aren't the risks I took. They're the ones I didn't. He finally looked up, his eyes kind. Fear makes a good advisor but a poor decision maker. After closing, Mai sat at the counter with her nightly cleaning checklist. Raj was in the kitchen, the sound of pots and pans creating a familiar rhythm as he prepared for tomorrow. The owner emerged from his office, sat beside her, and placed an old photo on the counter. That's me, he said, pointing to a young man with a saxophone. Had a band, had dreams, chose the safer path. He smiled, but there was a hint of something else in his eyes. The diner's been good to me, no regrets, but sometimes I wonder. He trailed off, then straightened up. Your shifts will be here if you need them, but don't let them be the reason you stay. On her walk home that night, Mai pulled out her phone and Lynn's card. The city hummed around her, traffic noise, distant music from bars, fragments of conversations, a urban symphony accompanying her moment of truth. Her grandmother had always said that courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and choosing to act anyway. Standing under a streetlight, Mai dialed the number. As it rang, she watched her breath make clouds in the cool evening air. Each ring felt like a heartbeat, a moment between what was and what could be. When Lynn answered, Mi's voice was steady. "Hi, it's Mai from the diner. I think I'm ready to make some music." The recording studio was nothing like Mai had imagined. Instead of the sleek, intimidating space she'd pictured, it was a cozy room with warm lighting and walls covered in old concert posters. Her grandmother's guitar looked almost at home here, resting on a stand between takes. "Let's try that bridge one more time." Lynn's voice came through the headphones. "Just like you're back at the diner, singing to yourself while restocking napkins. No pressure." Mai smiled at the image. She'd just done exactly that yesterday during her morning shift. Balancing two worlds wasn't easy. Her hands, still smelling faintly of coffee and dish soap, moved across the guitar strings as she recorded her third song of the day. Her feet ached from a busy breakfast shift, but somehow that made the music feel more authentic. These songs were born from real life, after all, from early mornings and long days and dreams that refused to die. The diner regulars had become her unofficial street team. Mrs. Chen proudly showed everyone who would listen the video of Mai's first performance on her phone. The teenage couple had created a social media page for her music, updating it with snippets of her new songs whenever she tried them out during Friday night performances. Even Mr. Thompson, who usually buried himself in his newspaper, had started requesting specific songs during his evening coffee. "Play the one about the sunrise," he'd say, or "How about that new one?" About taking chances. His gruff voice would soften when he talked about the music. Between recording sessions, Mai still carried plates and filled coffee cups, but something had changed. Her steps had a new lightness, her smile reached her eyes more often. Regular customers noticed the difference. "You're glowing," they'd say, and she knew it wasn't just from the kitchen heat. The owner had kept his word about flexible scheduling, but Mai insisted on keeping some shifts. "The diner's part of who I am," she explained to Lynn one day. "It's where these songs came from. I don't want to lose that." Lynn understood. Authenticity couldn't be manufactured in a studio. One particularly busy morning, while juggling a full tray of breakfast orders, Mai heard one of her songs playing on the diner's radio. She nearly dropped the plates in surprise. Raj rushed out from the kitchen to turn up the volume, and the whole diner erupted in cheers. Even the truckers who just stopped in for coffee joined the celebration, though they had no idea why everyone was so excited. The local music scene began to notice her. Small venues reached out, offering evening slots. Lynn helped her navigate these new opportunities, always reminding her to stay true to her story. "Your honesty is your superpower," she'd say. "These songs work because they're real." Some nights, after finishing a late diner shift, Mai would sit in the recording studio alone, working on new material. The songs kept coming, about dreams and fear, about coffee-stained aprons and midnight conversations, about the courage it takes to change and the strength it takes to stay the same. Her tip jar at the diner had transformed into a makeshift merchandise stand, holding simple CDs she'd burned herself, each cover decorated with a coffee ring and her signature. They sold out every week, mostly to regular customers who'd watched her journey from the beginning. One evening, as she was closing up the diner, a young girl came in with her mother. The girl clutched one of Mai's CDs, clearly well loved. "I started taking guitar lessons," she announced proudly, "because of your songs." Mai felt tears prick her eyes as she remembered herself at that age, watching her grandmother play. The mother smiled apologetically. "She made us drive across town to eat here." She wanted to see where the songs came from. They ordered pie, and Mai found herself sharing stories about music and dreams and the courage to try. The girl's eyes sparkled with the same light Mai now recognized in herself. Later that night, after they'd left, Mai sat at the counter with Raj, sharing a piece of leftover pie. "You know what's funny?" she said, watching the neon sign's reflection in the window. "I always thought choosing music meant leaving this place behind. But instead, it just made everything richer." Raj nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's because you're not just making music," he said, sliding her a cup of tea. "You're telling the truth. And the truth is, we're all more than one thing. You're not just a waitress who sings or a singer who waits tables. You're someone who found her voice, and that voice carries everything you are." Outside, the city was quieting down, but inside Mi's heart, the music was just getting started. Tomorrow would bring another early shift, another recording session, another step on this unexpected path. But for now, she sat in the warm light of the diner, holding her tea, feeling grateful for a journey that hadn't forced her to choose between two loves, but had instead shown her how to embrace them both. The city's annual summer music festival was in full swing, with crowds filling the downtown streets. Colorful banners hung between buildings, and music floated from every direction. On the main stage schedule, between two well-known bands, was a name that made the diner's regulars burst with pride. Local artist Mai, 7:30 p.m. That morning, Mi insisted on working her usual Sunday breakfast shift at the diner. "For good luck," she told the owner, who shook his head with a knowing smile. The regulars who came in were extra excited, many already wearing the handmade t-shirts that the teenage couple had designed, featuring a coffee cup with musical notes rising from it like steam. "Shouldn't you be resting your voice?" Mrs. Chen asked as Mai refilled her tea. But they both knew why she was here. The diner wasn't just where her music had begun. It was where she found her strength, her story, her truth. Every coffee stain on her apron, every regular smile, every quiet moment in the storage room had led to this day. The morning rush felt like a beautiful chaos of good wishes and nervous energy. Raj kept peeking out from the kitchen to give her encouraging thumbs-up signs. Even Mr. Thompson broke his usual silence, sharing that he'd convinced his granddaughter to drive him to the festival, his first concert in 20 years. By mid-afternoon, Mai was at the festival grounds for sound check. Her grandmother's guitar, recently professionally restored as a gift from the diner staff, gleamed under the stage lights. As she tested the microphone, she looked out at the empty field that would soon be filled with people. Her heart raced, but it was an excited flutter rather than fear. Lynn appeared beside her, clipboard in hand. "Remember when you didn't think you were really a musician?" she teased. They both laughed at how far things had come. In the past year, Mi's songs had spread beyond their city, finding listeners who connected with her honest lyrics about everyday dreams and simple moments of courage. As evening approached, Mai returned to the diner one last time before her performance. The owner had closed early so the entire staff could attend the festival. She found Raj in the kitchen, preparing a special dinner for everyone to share. "Your grandmother used to say that food and music both feed the soul," he reminded her, stirring a pot of her favorite soup. "She'd be so proud seeing you feed both." The familiar scent of the kitchen, mixed with the excitement of the coming performance, brought tears to her eyes. At the festival, the crowd was larger than she imagined. From backstage, she could see the diner crew in the front row. The owner, Raj, the teenage couple, Mrs. Chen, and Mr. Thompson in his wheelchair. They'd brought the spirit of the Bluestone Diner with them, holding up signs with coffee cups and music notes. When she stepped onto the stage, guitar in hand, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the same colors that would stream through the diner windows during her morning shifts. She adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. "A year ago, I was singing to coffee cups and sugar shakers," she began, and the crowd chuckled warmly. "Today, I'm still that waitress who dreams in melodies, and I wouldn't have it any other way. This first song is for everyone who's ever been brave enough to let their real life become their dream life." As she played, faces in the crowd lit up with recognition, not just from her growing fan base, but from people who saw their own stories in her songs. A barista nodded along to lyrics about dawn light and possibility. A nurse swayed to a melody about tired feet and hopeful hearts. A teacher closed her eyes during the chorus about everyday courage. Between songs, she shared simple stories about the diner, about Raj's wisdom, Mrs. Chen's kindness, the owner's belief in her, and the community that had become family. The festival lights twinkled like stars, but they couldn't outshine the joy in her heart. For her final song, she played the one she'd written about her grandmother. As she sang about inherited dreams and borrowed courage, about guitars and gentle hands, and love that transcends time, she felt something settle into place. This was more than a performance. It was a celebration of becoming who she was always meant to be. After the show, back at the diner for a late-night celebration, Mai sat at her familiar spot at the counter. Her festival wristband peeked out from under her waitress uniform. She had an early shift tomorrow, after all. Someone had brought her grandmother's photo from the back office, placing it near the register where it caught the neon light. So, Raj asked, sliding her the usual cup of chamomile tea, "How does it feel to be a star?" Mai laughed, shaking her head. "I don't feel like a star," she said, looking around at the familiar faces, the worn countertop, the coffee-scented air. "I just feel like me. Finally, completely me." Outside, the festival crowds were heading home, but inside the Bluestone Diner, a different kind of music played on. The sound of dreams coming true in their own perfect way, at their own perfect time, in the most perfectly imperfect place.